You've likely considered how language shapes, well, the very architecture of your thoughts, how it lets you build these bridges of understanding with others.
Hmm.
And maybe you've also explored the profound role religion plays in weaving these tapestries of meaning, forging bonds of community.
Right. Absolutely fundamental aspects of being human.
But have you ever stopped to think, could these two pillars, language and religion, have sprung from surprisingly similar evolutionary roots? Almost
Yeah.
like two vines intertwined, reaching for the same light.
It's a truly captivating idea, isn't it?
It really
That
is.
the tools we use to talk about our inner lives and the frameworks we build to navigate, existence itself,
Yeah, yeah.
they might share a kind of foundational blueprint.
Exactly. And that's what we're diving into today.
Yeah, we got a fascinating collection of research that really shines a light on this very interconnected, these parallel journeys of language and religion.
So, what kinds of sources are we looking at?
Well, there's a comparative study that tackles this head on, plus some really insightful articles digging into the origins of language itself, which is, a huge puzzle, and
Always.
others on how religions evolved, the different stages and forms, and even these phylogenetic approaches.
Ah, the tree diagram thinking.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Applying that kind of branching evolutionary model to both language and religious systems is pretty revealing.
Okay, so this isn't just some academic thought experiment.
Not at all.
By grasping these parallels, we hope you, the listener, can get a fresh perspective, maybe even a revelatory one, on belief systems, the sheer power of communication, and, well, the deep roots of human culture.
We're aiming for those aha moments, right?
Exactly. Those flashes where you see how these incredibly complex systems branched out over millennia. It's like decoding a bit of the human consciousness record.
Yeah, absolutely.
So where do we even start to untangle these threads? They seem so vast.
I think a natural place to begin is way back, at the very genesis. When did the potential for these complex systems even emerge in our species?
Okay, the deep origins. Let's talk language first. The timeline there is pretty interesting, isn't
It
it?
really is. The research shows a fascinating picture. Anatomically modern humans, we've been around for about, what, 200,000 years?
Roughly, yeah.
But language ability, and that didn't just switch on. It seems to have been a much more gradual unfolding, a slow blossoming of cognitive ability.
Oh, right. And I saw one source, I think it was from MIT News, mentioning genetic analysis suggests the capacity for language, the basic brain and body stuff needed, might go back at least 135,000 years.
Exactly. That's a huge stretch of time. And it's even before we have clear evidence of what we call spoken language today.
So the hardware was maybe there before the software was fully running, so to speak.
That's one intriguing idea emerging. Yeah. That language might have started as an internal cognitive tool first, a way to organize thought.
Like thinking to yourself before thinking with others.
Kind of. Organizing concepts internally before it evolved into the social communication system we rely on so heavily now, like crafting the software before you broadcast it.
That's a fascinating way to put it. And then the archaeology kicks in, right? Providing other clues.
Hmm. By around 100,000 years ago, we start seeing pretty compelling evidence of widespread symbolic behavior.
Like what specifically?
Well, things like early art, the deliberate use of pigments, ochre, and things like that, and ritual burials.
Okay, yeah. Those feel significant.
And the sources are quite clear. This kind of sophisticated symbolic stuff strongly implies some form of language was present. You need language to coordinate and give meaning to that kind of behavior.
It's like language was the key that unlocked that symbolic door.
Absolutely. That same MIT News piece quotes a linguist saying exactly that. Language was the trigger for modern human behavior.
Wow.
It's as if language opened up a whole new dimension of thought and expression. And when you look at today, over 7,000 distinct languages spoken globally.
It's staggering.
It just underscores the incredible diversification that sprung from those ancient roots.
Okay, so for language, maybe an internal start, then becoming social, symbolic behaviors showing up, and then this massive branching out, a gradual, staged process.
Pretty much, yeah.
Now, let's pivot to religion. Does its origin story look similar? Gradual, foundational?
Well, the fact that religion in some form is found in basically all known human cultures, the universality really points to deep evolutionary roots.
It suggests it's not just a recent invention, right?
Exactly. It strongly suggests the capacity for religious thought, maybe in very basic form, was also there very early on. And the research indicates the earliest form was probably animism.
Animism.
Right.
So the belief that spirits or essences are in natural things, trees, rocks,
That's
animals.
the core idea, yeah. A belief that natural objects, places, creatures possess some kind of spiritual essence or soul. A very direct way of seeing the world as alive, perhaps.
That feels very primal,
Yeah.
embedded. And there was that hunter-gatherer study you mentioned. Does that shed light on the stages?
It does. It used cultural phylogenetics, tracing cultural traits like a family tree
Right.
to figure out the relationships between different beliefs. And it suggests animism was the oldest trait,
Older than what else?
older than belief in an afterlife, older than shamanism,
Mm-hmm.
specialists interacting with the spirit world, and older than ancestor worship.
Interesting. So a kind of layering effect over time.
Seems like it. And what's really striking is the apparent absence of high gods, those powerful moralizing deities in these very early hunter-gatherer groups.
Really? No big boss god.
Not in the way we often think of them now. It suggests those more complex theological ideas likely came later, maybe as societies got bigger, more hierarchical.
Okay, so that mirrors language in a way. Early language may be focused on immediate stuff, basic communication. And early religion was this foundational belief in a spirit-filled nature without the elaborate doctrines we see later.
Precisely. Both seem rooted in simpler yet absolutely fundamental elements. Early language moving towards proto-language, early religion centered on animism, these the initial seeds.
The seeds of complexity. Okay, so we have these seeds planted. How did they grow into the giant complex trees we see today? Let's track language development first. The sources outline some stages, right?
Yes, building on that basic communication, scholars propose a few key developmental steps. First, you have what's often called primitive communication.
So like animal calls, grunts, gestures.
Basically, yeah, those pre-linguistic vocalizations, gestures, maybe emotional cries, meaningful in context, sure, but lacking grammar, lacking a big vocabulary, very much about immediate needs, social cues.
Anchored in the here and now.
Exactly. Then the next likely stage is proto-language, sometimes called the lexical stage.
Lexical meaning. Words.
Right, you start getting a larger lexicon, a growing collection of meaningful words or symbols,
Mhm.
but crucially, still without systematic grammatical rules to string them together properly.
So you could maybe point and say water or danger, but not form a full sentence like, I see dangerous water over there.
Something like that. You can name things, maybe simple actions, but constructing complex, grammatically sound sentences isn't really there yet. Derek Bickerton's idea about this kind of proto-language fits here. Simple words for key concepts, but no real syntax.
Okay, like the building blocks are accumulating, but the architectural plans aren't finalized yet.
Good analogy.
Yeah.
And then comes the really big leap, grammar and syntax.
And the sources suggest this was relatively recent, evolutionarily speaking, which feels kind of amazing.
It is. Getting systematic ways to combine words. That seems to be a later innovation. But it's what unlocks the truly explosive potential of language.
How so?
Well, grammar lets you combine words in recursive, rule-bound ways. Suddenly, you can express an almost infinite range of meanings, way beyond the immediate and concrete.
Right, you can talk about yesterday or next year or hypothetical situations.
Exactly. Some models suggest it started with a basic proto-grammar. Maybe simple two-word combos like drink water, meaning I want to drink water, or something similar. And then over time, complex grammar evolved, bringing in function words, the, a, is verb tenses, all the intricate stuff that gives modern languages their power and subtlety.
So it's grammar that really turbocharged language, letting us express nuance, abstraction, everything. Okay, now let's swing back to religion. What were the parallel steps in its structural development? Did it get its own kind of grammar?
Not grammar in the linguistic sense, but it definitely developed structure. Early animism, as we said, didn't have written rules or big institutions. It was more implicit, intuitive maybe, rich in symbolic thought, but not codified.
But we see signs of it developing, right? The archaeology.
Absolutely. The archaeological record gives us hints, those intentional burials from 100,000 years ago, often with grave goods.
Suggesting belief in an afterlife, or at least something beyond death.
Possibly, yeah. Or honoring the dead in a specific way. Even Neanderthal burials may be having flowers placed with them. These suggest early ritual, a concern for something beyond just the physical, long before organized religion as we know it.
These feel like personal or maybe small group things, though, not like a big established church.
Exactly. More localized, perhaps less formalized. But then, fast forward to the Upper Paleolithic, around 40,000 years ago. You get that incredible cave art, the carved figurines like the Venus figures,
Yeah, stunning stuff.
and these likely had deep religious or mythic meaning. They're glimpses into the proto-religious stories, the symbolic worlds of early humans.
So even without formal structures, these proto-religions were doing important work.
Definitely. They serve vital functions, providing ways to understand nature through myths, offering comfort about death, reinforcing social rules through shared rituals.
And fostering group cohesion, that seems key.
Hugely important. That sense of shared belief and practice really helps bind a group together.
So while religion didn't get a codified grammar-like language, it was building its own structure through shared symbols, rituals, and these emerging foundational stories. Its own building blocks for meaning and connection.
That's a great way to put it. And just like language, as societies got bigger and more complex, religion also started to branch out, diversify significantly.
Ah, the branching pattern again. This seems central.
It really does. And the research on language evolution hits this hard. The dominant idea is that all or most languages today probably trace back to a common origin,
A single mother tongue. Or maybe a small group of related ones.
something like that, an ancestral language, or maybe a cluster that then split and diverged as people migrated across the globe.
Like dropping a pebble in a pond, the ripples spreading out and changing.
Exactly. And over millennia, these ripples formed distinct language families,
Mhm.
Indo-European, Sino-Tibetan, Afro-Asiatic, and so on, huge groupings branching out over vast time spans.
The language family tree image really helps visualize that, doesn't it? A trunk, major limbs, smaller branches, down to the twigs of dialects.
It's a perfect metaphor. And it wasn't just passive splitting. As languages separated, they also developed unique features, new sounds, new dialects, new grammatical rules.
And linguists can actually trace these changes back, reconstruct older forms.
To some extent, yes. Comparative linguistics does amazing work reconstructing proto-languages, like Proto-Indo-European, the ancestor of hundreds of modern languages. The whole process looks a lot like biological evolution, variation, inheritance, selection favoring certain linguistic forms.
So languages are constantly changing, evolving, branching, some thriving, some fading away. It's dynamic.
Very dynamic. Now, does religion show a similar branching pattern? The evidence strongly suggests yes.
How so?
Lance Grande, an evolutionary biologist who's looked at this, argues that every major religion is a branch of a complex evolutionary tree of ideological diversification shaped over time by cultural selection.
So the same core idea, shared ancestry, then diversification.
Exactly. Religions, like languages, seem to share common roots in earlier beliefs and practices. Then they diverge due to history, doctrine, cultural interactions.
Can you give an example?
Well, the Abrahamic faiths are a classic one.
Mm.
Judaism, Christianity, Islam, all trace back to shared ancient Hebrew traditions and figures like Abraham.
Right.
But they branched off, developing unique theologies, rituals, scriptures. It's like how Latin branched into French, Spanish, Italian. Related, but distinct.
And those simplified evolutionary tree of religion diagrams you sometimes see, they show this too.
They try to, yeah. Often showing animism at the root, branching into regional forms, then into the major world religious families. It captures that sense of divergence from common origins.
And we see that progression in complexity too, right? From animism to polytheism in early farming societies.
Often with ancestor veneration becoming more prominent.
Then those big, organized polytheistic systems in places like Mesopotamia, Egypt, with their pantheons and temple structures.
Precisely. And then later, the development of monotheism, Judaism emerging, and the subsequent rise of major world religions like Buddhism, Christianity, Islam, which themselves often built on or reacted against earlier traditions.
And the branching doesn't stop there, does it? You get schisms, new movements.
Constantly. Just like new dialects or languages can emerge, new religious interpretations, sects, and entirely new movements keep appearing.
So that tree metaphor, trunk, branches, twigs, it really seems to fit both language and religion remarkably well. Shared origin, continuous splitting, and adaptation.
It's a powerful parallel.
Yeah.
And it makes you ask, why? What underlying structural similarities might explain these similar paths?
Good question. What are the key similarities? The sources talk a lot about symbols, right?
Absolutely fundamental. Both language and religion are built on intricate systems of symbols. In language, words are arbitrary symbols. The sound or letters, tree, don't inherently look or feel like a tree.
We just agree that's what it means.
Yeah, exactly. It's a shared convention. And religion is just saturated with symbols, the cross, the lotus, ritual gestures representing deeper abstract concepts or beliefs.
And the ability to think symbolically seems crucial for both.
Totally. The emergence of symbolic thought was likely pivotal. Language and religious ideas might have even co-evolved as this capacity developed. Once we could use symbols to think and talk about things that aren't physically present or are abstract,
Like spirits or justice or the past.
then both complex language and nuanced spiritual thought become possible.
It's interesting. Words and maybe deities are both, in a way, imaginary things made real by us agreeing they're real.
That's a fascinating way to frame it, yeah. Shared understanding gives them power. Another big similarity is oral tradition.
Before writing was widespread.
Exactly. For most of human history, both language and religious myths, stories, practices were passed down mainly by word of mouth.
And that inevitably changes things over time, doesn't it? Like a game of telephone across generations.
It does. Spoken language naturally shifts pronunciation, words, grammar, and orally transmitted myths and rituals also transform as they're retold, reinterpreted, adapted. You can see traces of this oral evolution in ancient texts, like maybe parts of the Epic of Gilgamesh.
So myth-making in religion is kind of like storytelling in language.
Very much so. Early humans told stories, proto-myths, to explain the world, their origins, the powers they felt around them. And these stories got refined, embellished, changed over time through retelling.
Mm.
Linguistic phrases and religious stories both mutate, yet keep a recognizable thread.
Which brings us back to branching again. Language families, religious families, and using those phylogenetic methods.
Right. That formalizes the comparison. Scholars use tree diagrams, originally from biology, to map relationships between religions based on shared beliefs, rituals, history.
Just like linguists map language relationships based on shared words and grammar.
Exactly the same logic. And just like languages have cognate words, words from a common ancestor, like Cainite in English and Ritter in German,
Okay.
religions seem to have cognate beliefs or shared core narratives pointing back to a common source.
The Great Flood story is often used as an example here, isn't it?
It's a classic, found in so many different, seemingly unconnected cultures globally, often with striking similarities in the basic plot.
Suggesting maybe a very old shared proto-story that branched out and adapted locally.
That's the idea. The details change who builds the boat, which mountain they land on, but the core elements persist. Divine anger, a flood, survival, repopulation, like a linguistic root generating related words. Each culture puts its own dialect on the core story.
You see that descent with modification, as Darwin would say, in rituals too.
And in key figures, think about Abraham in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Shared core story of the covenant, but different details, like which son was nearly sacrificed. It shows common ancestry, but also divergence.
It's like these core stories have an underlying grammar that gets adapted.
That's a nice way to think about it. And you even see it in polytheistic myths. The Proto-Indo-European story of a thunder god fighting a serpent or dragon.
Shows up in Greek Zeus, Norse Thor, Hindu Indra.
Exactly. Different versions, different cultural flavors, but a recognizable shared theme, like a common mythological vocabulary expressed in different dialects.
And the reasons why they diverge seem similar too. Geography, culture contact.
Definitely. Geographical separation lets groups evolve independently. Think of the Indo-Europeans spreading out their languages and myths diverged.
Mm-hmm.
And cultural contact leads to borrowing and mixing, like Buddhism spreading on the Silk Road, picking up local influences, or languages borrowing words from each other. Internal innovation happens too. New ideas, new prophets, new linguistic trends.
The mechanisms seem remarkably parallel. Separation, contact, innovation, driving change in both systems.
It really is striking. These two huge parts of human culture, language, religion seem to follow such similar evolutionary paths. It really makes you wonder about the deeper connections.
Yeah, what are the deeper cognitive and social roots that might explain this convergence?
Well, anthropology and cognitive science offer some fascinating ideas here. Both seem to be outcomes of our unique brains and our intensely social nature, maybe even co-evolving.
Co-evolving. How so?
Well, the sources highlight things like symbolic thought, theory of mind, knowing others have minds, and complex social cognition as prerequisites for both.
You need those to understand abstract symbols or complex social rules in religion or grammar in language.
Precisely. And there's that intriguing idea, maybe from Ian Tattersall, that sophisticated language emerging relatively late might have been the igniter for other symbolic stuff, like complex religion and art.
Like language provided the mental toolkit needed.
Plausibly, yeah. Once you have language, you can formulate, elaborate, and share complex, abstract, even spiritual ideas much more effectively. Language and symbolic culture, including religion, seem deeply tangled up.
And some researchers even suggest they weren't just side effects of brain evolution, but actively shaped it, that co-evolutionary idea.
Exactly. The argument is that as cultural behaviors like complex communication, ritual cooperation, myth transmission became advantageous for survival.
They could have created selective pressure favoring brains better equipped for those tasks.
Right. So biology shapes culture, but culture can also subtly shape biology over long timescales. It fits nicely with Dunbar's social brain hypothesis, too.
The idea that our brains got big partly to handle complex social groups.
Yeah. And language and maybe early religion were likely crucial tools for managing those larger, more cooperative groups more effectively than other primates could.
And looking at their functions, both seem geared towards group living, right?
Absolutely. Religion often boosts cooperation, pro-social behavior, in-group trust. Language is obviously essential for communication, coordination, knowledge sharing. Both help solve the challenges of living together.
And maybe specific religious features evolved because they helped cooperation in bigger groups, like watchful moral gods.
That's a key idea in the evolutionary study of religion, yeah. Belief in such gods might help maintain order and cooperation in larger societies where direct reputation tracking gets harder. Even if religion started as a byproduct of other cognitive traits, like our tendency to see agency everywhere.
Like seeing a face in the clouds.
Right, or our theory of mind running wild. Even if it started like that, its social usefulness likely explains why it became so widespread and developed.
And what about memetics, that idea of cultural meme spreading?
That's another lens. It views language and religion as complexes of ideas, practices, words, memes that replicate and mutate as they pass between people.
So a catchy story or a useful word spreads like a successful gene.
Kind of, yeah. The way a flood myth spreads and changes is like how a useful grammatical structure might spread. It treats them both as systems of evolving cultural information.
And finally, the anthropological view really ties them together in practice.
Definitely. In many societies, language and religion are inseparable. Losing the language can mean losing irreplaceable religious knowledge, prayers, stories, and often spreading a religion also spreads its main language.
Wow. Okay, so wrapping this up, the parallels are pretty striking.
They really are, from simple origins to complex branching systems,
Their reliance on symbols and stories.
similar ways of being transmitted and adapting.
And their shared, absolutely fundamental role in shaping human societies and cultures.
It really highlights this deep human drive to create systems of meaning, to connect with each other, to make sense of the world, whether through words or beliefs.
That need to understand our place in it all and share that understanding.
Exactly.
So here's a final thought to leave our listeners with. Considering these deep connections we've explored, how might studying one, say, really digging into the evolution of a specific religious narrative or ritual actually give us new insights into how language itself evolved, or maybe vice versa?
That's a provocative question.
What does this interconnectedness tell us, ultimately, about the very nature of how we make sense of the world? How we construct reality, individually and collectively? How might these two great intertwined systems still hold secrets about our shared human journey if we look at them through this lens of parallel evolution?
Something profound to ponder, definitely. How the study of one might illuminate the other in ways we haven't even considered yet.